People joining us. Welcome. Welcome to the Power of Digital Learning webinar. Thanks for being here today. Feel free. We have just a few people here at the moment. It would be great to know where you're calling from. If you don't mind, put in a little note for with your name and where you're calling from. That would be great. And we'll start in just a quick moment. Okay. Great. Thanks, Inga. You're getting us started. All right, well, let's get going. Welcome, everybody. I'm just pleased to be here. Georgie, pleased to have you here, and kind of excited about this topic. This is the Power of Digital Learning. That's today's webinar. I'm Lori Shook from Shook Svensson, and this webinar is one of our series in our one of the webinars in our series of webinars called Rewiring Workplaces. At Shook Svensson, we're interested in creating great conversations in these webinars on relevant topics, and we want to share with people who also work on culture development in organizations. So learning and development, HR people, internal coaches on the internal side, but also external coaches and consultants, for example, who also come in and work with organizations and help them develop a culture that makes it a great place to work. At Shook Svensson, we're a small consultancy, and that's our aim, is to support companies to create a great place to work, whether they win the award or not. We use coaching and training to help create cultures where both people and results thrive. Often there's an emphasis on one or the other, people or results. We like to find out how we can have both. All of our work is based on brain science, neuroscience, both our content, so how we approach leadership, emotional intelligence, teamwork, and all that. That's all based on brain science. And our delivery. We changed a lot when we learned about how the brain learns. And because of what we've learned, we've moved to hybrid training programs where the conceptual things that people need to learn are delivered online, and they're self-paced, bite-sized formats, which is more brain friendly than dumping a lot of things and tools and concepts at people in a full day of training. So we use that format and then use the implementation phase of learning or coaching in person, whether that's live or, it's all live, but it's virtual or in person. Okay, that's Shook Svensson. That's what we do. That's Rewiring Workplaces. Let's talk about today's webinar, and let me introduce Georgie Cook. So Georgie, thank you for being here. Georgie is Director and Head of Learning Experiences at Lima Delta. That's an agency that helps forward-thinking L&D teams level up their learning. She loves designing game-changing digital learning experiences that help people develop themselves professionally. I love all that. I couldn't have said it better, so I read it. Georgie, please introduce yourself further if you wish.
Hi, Laurie. Thank you so much for having me today. Really excited to be here to talk about the power of digital learning. And I guess at Lima Delta, we believe there really is a power to digital learning, and it's a really important part of how employees not only learn in the workplace, but also develop themselves as individuals, further their own skill sets, their careers, and get great results for the organizations they work for. So that's what we're about, and really looking forward to speaking with you about it today.
Great. It was nicely said the way you put that all together. That's great. All right, so topics for today, so our audience knows what we're up to. We're going to define digital learning. What do we mean by that? We're talking about the power of digital learning, but what do we mean by digital learning? We want to answer that question of, will we lose in-person learning forever, which I know is a lot of people's fear when we go to something completely new. What about all those magical moments we have in person? Then we'll look at as part of that, we'll look at the benefits of what you get in digital learning, and then the challenges and how we can manage those. And we'll have a short demo. I'm excited about that too. And we have some requests for our audience members that are here today. Please do write comments, questions in the chat box. We'll have a chance to have more of a conversation towards the end. And if you wouldn't mind, keep your mute buttons on just in case you have some background noise showing up. And of course, we've got a digital hand that you can raise if you want to speak or ask questions. This is a dialogue. It's not a script. We're going to open this up and see where we go in the conversation. Okay, so slides are going off. Here we go. Okay, Georgie, let's start with that definition. What is digital learning? How would you describe it?
Great place to start. So I personally define digital learning as some material that somebody can access online for the purposes of learning, something that they can work through at their own pace. It's often done asynchronously. They often have choice over exactly when and where they do it. And it's really, I guess, quite an individual piece of learning. And for lots of people, I think it conjures up the idea of a traditional e-learning course. So perhaps a 60-minute course that you sit down in front of. It looks a bit like a PowerPoint deck. You click through it. Maybe there's somebody talking at you for those 60 minutes. And digital learning like that can get a bit of a bad rep. And that stuff is definitely out there. But for me, digital learning is so much broader and more exciting than that, and can actually encompass anything from articles that you might read online, podcasts you might listen to, perhaps engaging practical simulations where you're kind of in a digital environment and you're practicing doing things. So for me, it's a really broad definition actually, and can be anything from super interactive, highly kind of engaging simulations all the way through to great pieces of content that you find and read online.
Yeah, I'm really focusing on the words at the moment as you talk between passive and active. We can passively read something or listen to something. And then there's this other bit about how engaged are we? Are we also, making dinner, or, are we really focused on it? So there's some kind of passive to active, and then that engagement level feels like another thing we need to pay attention to. Like, how are we engaging people? Even if we are just talking, how do we grab people's attention, change tone of voice? There's all kinds of things to pay attention to.
Absolutely. And I think for me, the best digital learning is a mix of all those things. And it's not just a one-hit wonder. I think we can probably all agree that if you really want somebody to learn something new, then one experience of hearing about that thing, or reading about that thing, or engaging in a conversation about that thing isn't going to be enough for you to really remember it and know how to apply that in your life. So for me, the best digital learning is actually a mix of all those things. So some bits might actually be passive, but then there's a really crucial part of how do we engage people with the doing and the reflecting and the acting as well. Yeah, because when we talk at Shook Svensson, when we talk about learning, we talk about doing new things that change behavior. So it isn't just learning concepts, but about learning something, trying something. And it requires all those levels of learning. I need to learn some concepts, perhaps. I need to learn how to do something. I need to practice it, get good at it. So that's part of how we define learning, and it's very consistent with how the brain works. Absolutely. But I know we want to have a question for ourselves and our audience members, for those of you who are here live with us. I know there's going to be some who are watching later, watching a recording later. But we're interested in your experiences of digital learning. So what's a word that describes your most recent experience of digital learning, or perhaps your assumptions about digital learning? So even if you are watching this in a recording, even think about that. What do you assume about digital learning? What's that mean to you? Or what's your experience? We'll see if we get some. Sorry, Georgie, please. I was just going to say, while we wait for people to share their thoughts, I wondered what your assumptions are, Laurie, or perhaps what you hear people saying to you about digital learning. Yeah, I was going to ask you too, but I'll go first. In my experience, I think people are hesitant. It's more of a feeling than what they say about it. It's like, digital learning, our people aren't going to like it. They don't like all the passive
learning. Oh, people are tired of being online. We've been locked down and living online. We don't want to be online anymore. I hear that a lot. We want to go back to in person. I'm hearing that a lot. And so there's an assumption that digital learning doesn't engage people in a way that is in person and live. In a hybrid sense, you can have that. Digital is just a part of it, but there's an assumption that it's digital and digital only. How about you? What are some of the things you hear?
Yeah, definitely that as well, that it's digital and digital only, which as we'll get on to talking about, definitely doesn't have to be the case. I think I hear two main assumptions, perhaps based on the type of digital learning people have experienced. So sometimes people might say to me that they find digital learning dull, that they see it as something that they have to just get through rather than something that's really going to enrich them and help them develop and grow. They see it as a kind of must do, not a want to do. So I think that's one assumption I hear, that people think it's not going to be fun for them.
To be fair, just one sec, to be fair, when I run in-person trainings, there's also those kind of assumptions that show up in a classroom too, as though this is going to be boring and it's not going to be relevant. And anyway, so to be fair, that also works on in-person, but I interrupted you. Yeah.
Very true. I think the flip side of it is often if you're speaking to somebody who has had a really positive experience with digital learning, often they'll say things like, oh, it was so useful because I could look it up when I needed it. Right. The information was there when I actually wanted it. I could go at my own pace. It would, it was really interesting. I picked up a new depth of knowledge that I didn't have before, and I was able to reflect on it in my own time. So I think I kind of hear both positive and less positive assumptions about digital learning, often based on the experiences people have had prior.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in our chat box, but Lisa has said in her experience, she's also heard a variety of comments, some good and some negative. So it depends. I think you're saying the same thing. Yeah, very true, Lisa. Yeah. Yeah, and we've got it's like brave new world of what is this digital learning thing? How do we do it? What's what's going to work about it? And of course, there's nervousness, like there is with anything new.
Absolutely, and I think also digital learning is developing and changing a lot. It's been around for quite a long time now, but in more recent years, we've started really opening up to the possibilities of what we can do, and that brings with it a lot of excitement and anticipation about the brilliant experiences we can create online. But also, to your point, it can create that fear of change, both in terms of what will this look like for the users? Is it going to be a good experience for them? But I think there's also understandably a fear of that change for current L&D professionals as well. What does it mean for them and their role, and what does it mean for the skills they might need? So I think it's very valid to have those thoughts about it, and hopefully today we can give some guidance on how to approach it in a way that works for both users and L&D teams. And L&D, yeah, because there's some ways we can make learning more cost effective and efficient time-wise. People have less and less time these days, and that's one of the things. But we'll come back to that. Georgie, you said. You reminded me that you've been in this field for a long time. I've only, at Shook Svensson, we've only been working on digital learning for about 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. But I'm wondering if you would speak to a little bit of the changes you've noticed. In the years you've been involved. Absolutely. So I've been creating digital learning for about 10 years now, and when I first started, it was definitely a lot of the courses approach. So kind of we've got a topic that people need to know about. We'll make one course on it. And there was always a lot of kind of interaction in there. There was always questions and things like that, but it was essentially something that you expected people to receive. They click through it, they learn it, they go away. In more recent years, there's been much more acknowledgement of a lot of the things that you talk about, Laurie, at Shook Svensson, around behavior change. And it's not actually just about absorbing knowledge, it's about the behaviors that you change as a result of it. And therefore, how we design the learning needs to be oriented towards the change that we want to see in the business, not just the information that we want to get across. So the more and more that the industry has been accepting that, that's been music to my ears, the more and more we go down that way, the more and more I love my job, because it becomes so much a more interesting challenge. It's not just about how do I communicate something to you, it's about how do I motivate you? How do I show you that this matters to you? How do I encourage you to practice? How do I create a culture and an environment where you want to do that and you see the benefit of it? So it's a much more interesting human challenge, which leads to much more broad and varied solutions, because every workplace is different, every learner is different, and I love being able to kind of design for that. So I think the industry is moving towards that recognition of behaviors and humans being at the center of it, and really needing to design for them.
Yeah, nice. That I get why it's more and more fun, because, well, you probably have more tools at your disposal to use for design, but it is also more and more human, which is great, isn't it? Because that's the thing we didn't like. It seems so robotic and inhuman.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of, as you mentioned this earlier, a lot of the fear around this is, there can be some really magical moments that happen in group live settings. The moment where you're working with a small group in a classroom, and you kind of have this breakthrough moment together, or you get to practice something together, you build new relationships in a classroom. And I think there's understandably been a worry about, will we lose that if we go online? And I think digital, actually, now, the more and more tools we have, the more the technology develops, the less we have to lose that. We're just thinking differently about it. And I guess one final thing I'll say on this is that it's not about saying goodbye to in-person elements of training, and it's not about saying goodbye to group-based work. I think that is so important, and we can talk about why from a, the science of learning point of view and how the brain responds. It's so important. It's just about how do we take the bits that are best for digital, how do we do that in a digital way and retain the face-to-face bits and make them as valuable as we can.
Yeah. So make it hybrids. But I think that word hybrid is putting a bad taste. It just reminds us of COVID,
It does, yeah.
Oh, we're going to have hybrid learning. But hybrid really is just a mix of modalities, isn't it? And some digital. Sorry.
I was going to say, you mentioned that earlier, that's your approach. Maybe you could talk a bit about what it means to you.
Yeah, well, I've been training for 25 years, experiential training, and learned a lot about experiential training. So of course, the first time we thought about digital, I was like, oh, that'll be really dry. But we can still make it experiential in the sense of interactivity. So we're interactivity with the online bits. And the content comes online. There's stuff we learn, which is a small percentage. The concepts we learn, small percentage of actually the whole learning process. So let's do that online. Let's be consistent, especially if you're rolling something out across a company. Let's have all the learning parts, the content presentation part, be consistent. And then you can have lots of different facilitators take that and make it relevant for the people in the room. Live, in conversation, in cohorts, whether that live is virtual or in person. We'll do either. Some of our programs are designed for virtual, and it's virtual only, but that's easily changed to in person and doing things in companies with a live trainer. So we're absolutely committed to having it be hybrid like that. And we offer digital programs, but we don't want people to go through them on their own. One person going through the program. We think it's a very minimal experience that they get. And Inga had this question in the chat box about how to deal with cultural differences. And I think that's part of where the cultural differences come in. Well, the content may be the same, and you might have translations and that kind of thing on the online content, different languages, but it's the implementation, the live part, where you need to have culturally relevant trainers or coaches being there to bring the work together in the live part. So for me, that's part of the answer to that question about cultural differences.
Absolutely. And there's another question in there about with the digital side, how do you actually keep people really engaged with the digital element, and how do you make sure it's interesting and inspiring? And I think maybe I could talk about an example. I think that might
just what I was thinking. Why don't you share with us an example?
Yeah, help kind of bring it to life. And I've got one that also actually touches on the cultural differences piece as well. So this was a digital learning project that at Lima Delta we worked on for a streaming service client. And it was all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they kind of came to us saying they had a new head of diversity who was just doing amazing things in the business, but he was only one person, and they wanted to be able to share, what they were doing around DEI with kind of consistency. They wanted to get a consistent message out about that across the whole organization around what they were doing, and also what they expected of all of their people to do as well to really support the inclusion efforts. So I think when they came to us, they had in mind, they wanted it to be digital for the reasons you said earlier about getting a consistent message across, making sure it works for everybody. But I think they kind of had in mind that it would probably be quite presentational. But we had a lot of the same questions as Inga had here about, well, it needs to be inspiring, it needs to be really interesting and engaging. This is such an important topic. How are we going to make it really resonate and land with people? So what we actually decided to do was, rather than kind of going into, this is a definition of DEI, this is what we're doing, this is what you need to do, we decided to actually make it much more human and real. And we crowdsourced real stories and examples from within that workplace of moments where people had felt excluded, or where they'd felt like they had real challenges around being their authentic selves in the workplace. And we gathered those stories and retold them. So we anonymized them, but told those stories through video and animation, and released them one at a time, week by week. So each one was almost like a little episode in the story of DEI at this organization. So that inherently, I think, is engaging. As humans, we are interested in other people's stories and experiences. We're much more engaged by a story about what somebody actually went through than we are about being told, this is how you need to be. So we flipped it and said, right, let's tell the stories first, and then let's break down what was going on in that story. So this was the experience this person had. Why? What led to that? What were some of the things that could have been approached differently that would have led to a much better, more inclusive outcome for that person? And we started the conversation digitally by sharing lots of different people's opinions on that, and challenging some misconceptions. And then we supported that client to then be able to take that conversation out of the digital learning space and onto a moderated forum internally where the conversation kind of continued. So we did several episodes where that happened. It kind of went story, exploration of what was going on, what you can do, several episodes of that. And it culminated in getting people to make their own pledges. So having seen all of this, what can I do as an individual differently? What's some small actions I can do to create a more inclusive workplace? And people were sharing their ideas. We had a live stream of the ideas that people were sending in. And, they were things from, I'm going to put my pronouns in my signature, to I'm going to make sure that I'm not scheduling meetings at school pickup time, to, just loads of different really great ideas that were being generated. And it became such an active learning experience. Everybody was definitely learning, but we were crowdsourcing elements of that, and people were really involved themselves. So I think that's an example of how you can take something that could have been quite a passive e-learning course and instead turn it into something that's much more human, based on stories and with lots of opportunities for people to really practice and get involved.
To make it real, to create the neural pathways for themselves, all of that, we think about the brain and how it works and how it learns.
Exactly. And it kind of, what their L&D team did internally was also take that and use it as prompts and discussions in team meetings. So to the point around cultural differences, that meant that team leaders in all the different countries could be handling those conversations in a way that's appropriate for where they're based and their people. So kind of consistent core message, and then nuance happening in different locations.
That's been a theme for me for a long time. When we were doing spreading a certain training around the world, like there's consistent core message. Here's like the thing we're all in integrity with, and then it's like a tree. You know, that's the trunk of the tree, and then there's branches and you know, smaller branches, because and I'm looking at your background there with the tree. Once you get into different cultures, or you know, there might be a niche culture, they're still working with the core principles, you know, that can be consistent and spread digitally. And then there's the local conversations. Yeah, great. Inga, I'm curious if that feels like it answers your question, or if you have any other questions related to that. And we see Inga.
Yes, thank you. It is actually, and it makes sense to have this core message, that because we will train trainers in each region, so for them to have the ability to adapt it to their own country and culture and their own people. That makes total sense, especially because when you talk about stories, we are a US company, so lots of them have a US influence, which doesn't land well in certain countries. So that's something to think about, how we could make these animations of the stories like neutral.
Yes. Or local.
Yes.
Relevant.
So thank you.
That's such a great point, Inga, and that's something that comes up a lot actually in the work we do with clients, is this idea of how do you make sure it's not kind of Eurocentric or US centric. If we are sending one consistent message out to a global organization, I think there is work to be done there to make that message feel it can never be 100% relevant to every person, but it can feel like a fair representation of the organization. So perhaps when you're telling stories or using examples, or maybe if you feature experts from within the organization in your content, I think trying to get a fair representative spread there is really important, rather than just having maybe one expert appear in some videos. Could we have 3 or 4 from different regions, so that people kind of think, oh, actually, I'm based in India and there's somebody here from where I am who's talking about it, and I can relate to this, and I feel like my part of the business is seen. I think that's important for engagement as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Inga. So, Georgie, I know you have other examples about digital learning. You want to share another one?
Yeah, there's one other actually that's a bit different that I thought I would talk about, because it really speaks to the point we were making earlier about behaviors and making learning really interactive. So this example was very different. It was for a high street bank. They're global, so had some of the challenges that Inga was referencing there. It was for customer-facing staff, and the business felt that these staff needed to improve some of the kind of core skills that were related to their job. And a lot of them were quite soft skills. So things like, how were they communicating with their customers? How were their sales skills? How were they influencing people? So there were several core skills. And we worked with this client to really get to the nub of, if people improve these skills, what do you think they would do better? Like, if they're here now and we want them to get to here, what does this look like? Really getting to those behaviors. And then again, rather than telling people what they should do, we instead decided to use the power that digital gives us and create branching simulations that gave people opportunities to practice in a really safe space. So imagine that moment in a classroom where the person stands up and says, right, we're going to do a role play now. And everyone goes, oh, shrinks backwards. So one of the things digital is great for is being able to create opportunities like that. So you still get the opportunity to practice and say, okay, I would say this, I would say that next. but it feels like a safer space. If I fail, nobody's there to see or listen. If I mess up, if I say something silly, I think it just takes all of that fear away.
Yeah.
So we essentially created digital role plays where you were kind of watching videos of the other person speaking to you, and you were choosing how you would respond. And it was designed to really simulate and get as close as possible as we could to realistic conversations that they would have with customers. And they would choose how they would respond. The conversation would take different paths based on how they respond. And at the end, they kind of find out which skills they were performing really highly at, which ones needed a bit more work. And we were able to say, okay, so when you chose this answer, factually that was correct, but maybe it was a bit abrupt. It's that kind of feedback we were able to give as we go through. So we created several of those at different kind of skill levels and allowed people to go through and practice and also receive tips from their peers who were already experts, kind of like the people that had gone before them were giving them some tips at the start and the end. So that was the kind of really nice way of, I guess, acknowledging that the training was about developing skills and behaviors. It wasn't really about knowledge. I don't need to know what communication is. I need to be able to do it better. And so we oriented the whole solution around that.
Yeah. I just want to repeat a couple of things that you said, because I think it's really important and to highlight it. There is the ability with digital learning to branch, meaning that there's something that's happening, sort of like, let's call it like the main plenary session in a way. Maybe that's not a good analogy, but anyway, in the main, the main track of the learning. And then there's something that you do. And depending on what you do, you could go down a different path in the digital training. And one path might be, oops, that's not quite correct. Try again. So you can go back and choose a different answer, and then you'd end up on a different path. And that, depending on the path, it gives feedback to the person and tips for them to move forward. And those are pre-programmed based on the knowledge and wisdom of the designers, knowing what are the different things that people typically do, right? So it's not like AI is embedded in this and it can go everywhere, but it's, So I just wanted to explain that a little further because I was fascinated by that when I learned about that. Oh, wow, we can have these different, it's like movies where you can have different endings,
Yeah, it's like those choose your own adventure storybooks. If you want to do this, turn to page 8. If you want to do this, turn to page 10. It's that kind of thing where the user can be really in control of their experience. And I think that's a real benefit of digital. It recognizes that each person is an individual at different levels and can be set up to be tailored to that individual person. Yeah.
So there's a lot more it feels more personalized. Yeah. And definitely interactive. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And on the personalization point, I know this is something we've worked on a lot together, Laurie, isn't it? Because we've created some digital learning together for your Rewired program. And one of the things that we talked a lot about then was, this is going to be the bit that people do individually before they come together into learning groups to discuss and build on things themselves. So this individual part is actually where we want to try and be really personal, tailored, and get people to do reflecting and kind of thinking on their own so that then they've had some really rich insights that they can take to the group discussions later. And that was sort of part of what we were trying to get at, wasn't it, with our Rewired program?
Yeah. And do you want to show a little demo of that and talk us through the design thinking behind it?
Yeah, I can share that now. So everyone should now be able to see a lovely sunny yellow screen here. So Laurie, perhaps do you want to explain a little bit about how this fits in with the broader kind of Rewired program, and then I can talk about the role this plays?
Sure, yeah. So Rewired, we have a big Rewired to Lead program. And this one that we're looking at is the very first module, which is also called Rewired to Relate. It's a standalone module. And it's essentially the neuroscience of emotional intelligence. How do you learn about what your brain is doing and how that drives emotions and drives behaviors? How do I recognize what's happening for me, and how do I manage that? So that's what this program is about. And this page is the very first page of that.
Yes. And as I understand it, the idea is that everybody goes through these short modules independently themselves, but they then come together in a cohort group to discuss their learnings and have that kind of social learning element afterwards.
That's right. We do a launch in a webinar format for a whole cohort, and then it breaks out into these small learning groups. So they get a dedicated group of about 3, maybe 2, sometimes 4. And that's the group that they're really with throughout the duration of the program. And those conversations get really intimate. But the content is online. So they do a little online learning and then go to those. And then we come back to large cohort webinars. And a lot of that, large cohort webinars and the tracking and all of that, is to hold accountability and to hold structure, because people need structure to go through things. But this is the self-paced part. Yes. They also like choice and autonomy. So yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm showing here is a short piece of one of those autonomous pieces that people go through themselves. So I'm just going to point out a few of the things that we've done here in the design to really try and make it feel personal and to encourage reflection and action. So right from here on the first page, this is just a title page here, but you can see we're kind of talking directly to the users and showing them what they're going to get out of this. So if you're here, the chances are that you want to improve how you relate to others at work, at home, or with friends. Are you ready to get to know your brain? So we're speaking directly to people. We're telling them what they're going to get out of this and how it's going to improve, their life at work and also at home. And when we say, let's go, we start off again with trying to create a situation here that everyone can relate to. So here we're talking about that feeling of being stressed at work. And we start here about saying you can probably tell quite quickly when your colleagues or friends are stressed. Maybe they withdraw into themselves. What do you do? So getting people to think about themselves and make it personal to them right from the start. So we say, think about a recent time when you were upset or frustrated by something at work. Looking back now, are you satisfied with your reaction? So I'm going to say here, no. And as I move forward, I can see how my response ties in with everybody else doing this program with me. The version I'm looking at here is a demo version, which is why there's only 6 responses. But this, I wanted to show this because it's a great example of how you can still bring that social feeling into a digital environment. So we can see here, I've said, no, I wasn't that happy with how I've reacted previously. And I can get the sense here that I'm not alone in that. So this has all acted as a bit of a hook. It's making me thinking, okay, yeah, actually, I think there is something I want to work on here. And now it's telling me how this module will help me work on that. So what's coming up. So that sort of sets the stage. And then we can come into really getting into some of the deep content here. And as you said, Laurie, this is where we want to be delivering the key learning, the key consistent messages, the foundational understanding that everybody wants to have that they can then apply to themselves later. So we're getting into the neuroscience here of our emotional lives. So talking about the limbic system, which is the part of our brain that tries to keep us safe and I guess can trigger a lot of emotional reactions for us. And we use a mix of videos. So here we've got videos of you, Laurie, talking us through some of these concepts. And we supplement that with, again, making it experiential for the users. So they can learn about it from you in that video. And then we say, okay, now let's have you experience it for yourself and kind of guide people through this process of thinking of a particular situation, bringing it up and thinking about the emotions that come with it, and then the reactions that that emotion might cause. And
just to say, that video that we just scrolled by is an experiential. It takes people on a journey of experiencing what's going on for them when that situation occurs.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And we move on then to kind of go into a bit more of the detail around what the limbic system part of our brain does for us. So we've got lots of, you can see just from those few pages that we have a real mix of types of interaction here. We've got things to read, we've got questions to answer, we have videos to watch, and that's all about creating that sense of variety and interactivity. But I think really core to these modules, and what I think works so well about them, is this personal experience and reflection, that you're expected not just to read and absorb this, but you're guided through how to think about how it really relates to you. And the more personal and relevant we can make this, the much more our audience are likely to engage with it.
Yeah. So they get started with engaging with the digital work, they learn something about themselves, and then those conversations that they go have with their learning groups, those groups of 3 or so, that has those conversations become very deep and intimate, and everybody gets into more of a vulnerable space because the digital side set them up for that.
And I think
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Because I think that's such a lovely blend that you've got there, and it shows that bringing in digital doesn't mean that we have to lose the in-person element. And actually, it's about how do we set them up so that they complement each other perfectly. And like you say, get people in the right headspace in the digital to be able to go and have those deeper conversations offline.
Yeah. And not to, sideline the digital part, but people usually say that those conversations are the best part of the program, because they learned the stuff they needed to learn, and then went and deepened it with other people, social learning. And at first I was like, well, what about our program? But I know they wouldn't be having those conversations in those learning groups if it wasn't for your great work, Georgie, putting it together in a very engaging way. So, and for them doing that online. So it is a mix. And what they remember is the social part, which is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about everything playing its part in the overall outcome we want, which is, for people to understand themselves better at work and create better workplaces. And I wonder if it's worth us talking about, because I know that does come up a bit, doesn't it, for some people thinking about, are we going to lose the face-to-face part? So I wonder if it's worth us kind of addressing that and thinking about some of the challenges that do come with digital and how we can address them. I guess what would you say if someone says, does digital learning mean we're not going to have face-to-face anymore, and what does that mean for our organization? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, no, it doesn't mean that. First of all, it's when we first started doing digital learning, it was as a like a follow-up. So it was flipped around. We would do something in person, and then we would have it would be sort of like a repetition for people. And I tell people that, and then I say, but actually, a lot of learning, even in schools, is being flipped. So you do the content first online, and then you get all the rich learning parts of experiencing and all of that in person. I don't think we'll ever do away with that live part. A lot of it may go live, but virtual. But I also think when possible, people love to learn in person, and it's a really powerful space. I wouldn't ever dream of trying to eliminate it. And I don't think we should. Sometimes we need to have a virtual because we've got international teams. So we can't do away with virtual, but we should do in person when we can, when it makes sense for the business.
I think that's a key point, isn't it? It's about when it makes sense and when it really adds value, both for the learners and therefore for the business. Because I think there is a strong argument to say that it doesn't make sense for a business to be flying 1 or 2 trainers around the world, and that's the only opportunity that people can get to learn, because then you might have people new in role who have to wait 2.5 months for the next time this person comes over to deliver this session. And it's arguably, I would imagine, not that fun for the trainer to deliver the same session over and over and over again. So I think this is about saying, how can we get digital to do some of the heavy lifting of that? It can be cost effective for the organization to create something once and be able to use it for several years. It can be a better use of time for the participants, that it doesn't mean you have to take a whole bunch of people completely out of their day jobs for a whole day to learn something. It can be broken up amongst their role. So I think it's about where can we get digital to really help us solve some of those challenges, which means then the face-to-face time can be used where it really adds value. So where there are rich conversations to be had, to your point, where there's a space where you want to create a space for people to be able to get vulnerable and share and learn from each other, but not have to use that time for them to look at slides in a classroom and write down loads of notes.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, there are many trainers who are just repeating that same bit, and that's live time that costs a lot of money. That could be online and accessed when people have the headspace for it. And then the practices happen live in person. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's still the, in person, we still need to create a safe space so people can feel like they can practice and role play and those kind of things.
Yes.
But maybe they'll have had a taste online before they go and meet their colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one other thing that I was keen to bring up is that when we do go to digital, I think something that we need to be conscious of is the fact that you don't necessarily have the captive attention of everybody in the way that you do if you've got them in the classroom for a day. Because often when you go into a classroom, your laptops are away, you're there, you're in that space, there's nothing else distracting you, and you know that you're going to that session because it's been put in your diary, you turn up there and you're there to learn. And one of the challenges I think that comes with digital is the fact that you don't have that captive audience in the same way. It's actually up to us, firstly, to let people know that the digital training exists. Lots of people forget to promote it and market it to their people.
Right.
So kind of, I think there can be a myth sometimes of if we make it, people will come and they will create time for it themselves and they will be self-motivated from start to finish. And I think actually in order to make digital learning really successful, we again need to put ourselves in our learners' shoes and say, what do they need to be able to get here, to be able to give it some time and to want to do that. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of worth mentioning as well, that there's some work to do there around promoting it and showing people what they're going to get from this.
Yeah, I know it's not possible to do for all trainings in-house, all digital trainings, but I do really think, and again, it's from our perspective, that having this idea of a cohort, here's a start date, this is the launch time. You've got any time you want to go do the online bits, and then there's checkpoints because we need accountability. And if people don't know where to find it, that's a shame.
The first one.
That's the first one. But if we're having a concerted effort, let's do this together. And at this start point, here's where you find the things. Here's how to do this. And yeah, but I know it's not always possible to do the cohort thing because not all the people need the same thing at the same time. But having instruction of where to find things, because I know it's hard to find things sometimes on an intranet. We store things in different places. Is there one learning management system? Sometimes there's several. Sometimes you access things outside of the organization. Sometimes it's on LinkedIn Learning. And so I totally agree. I think my sense is that we're in, I hope it's a phase of figuring out how to make this sensible and to have signposts to where to find things. But I could be in, fantasy land about that.
Well, I think it's an important point, actually. I would say that right now we're potentially in a phase of content overwhelm where lots of people are moving to digital, but perhaps aren't being hugely discerning about how much digital they create and what. So, some organizations, for example, will purchase huge catalogs of what I would call off-the-shelf learning.
Right.
So LinkedIn Learning is one example of that. It's a pretty good one. There are lots of other things out there as well. You can buy, access to massive libraries of tons of e-learning courses and things like that. But sometimes, it's too much. People don't know where to start. They don't know why they should be doing it. So I think I would say with digital as well, it's really important to think really carefully about what you're actually asking people to do. Make sure it's something that there is a genuine benefit for the user, not just for the business, and then market it to that person based on the benefits for them, not the business. So the business might say, in my bank for example, the business might be thinking, we need these people to be better at speaking to their customers because we want to drive revenue in this particular area. But for the user, it's actually maybe more about, wouldn't you love to feel more confident going into these situations where you're advising customers? Or are you looking for the next step up in your career? These are some of the skills that you would need to be able to demonstrate, and this will help you develop those skills. I think really, giving people a real reason, for them.
It's a really important point. I mean, because that's about the brain also, and the attention. Because if you don't have a hook there, if you're like, oh, I have to do this, like you were saying earlier, Georgie. But if they have a reason, oh, I'm going to get something out of it. Now my attention is focused here, and my desire is focused here, and that's all part of a preface for learning. If we have desire, our brains are more open and we learn better. So that's a really great point. Market these things internally.
Definitely. And one other point I learned from you, Laurie, and from doing the Rewire to Lead work with you, was also around how people often respond really well to a degree of autonomy in life, but in work and in the choices that they make. Yes. And I think that's another almost watch out with digital learning, because digital does give us the ability to, for example, force people to click through everything, show us that they've opened and read everything. There can be a temptation to assume that that's for the best, and that, of course, we want to know people have done it. We need to know people have clicked through everything. But sometimes removing people's autonomy to that degree and them feeling locked and trapped in this experience can actually sometimes cause a reaction too far the other way, that then you get people just going, I'll just click, 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 click. You can't tell me what to do, kind of thing. Right. Which we obviously really want to avoid, because we've designed this so that it's valuable for them. So I think we need to try and make sure that the digital environment, is welcoming, and people want to be there, and they're there because they know what they're going to get out of it, and they're genuinely engaged, rather than trying to trap them into something just because we can with digital.
Yeah. Or tick box that says, yes, I did do it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if people, we have just about 8 minutes left. I'm wondering if people have questions or comments, chat box or voice, just want to invite others into the conversation. Maybe concerns. Are there other concerns showing up? Or Georgie, maybe you're thinking of other things people have said, concerns that they have about digital learning. If there's anything else.
I think one other thing that comes up sometimes is the gap between learning something and doing something about it, which I think comes back to what we were saying earlier around behavior change. So that sometimes people think, or kind of worry, that people will go through any learning course, but will it actually change anything? And I think that, again, is really over to us as designers to build that in. So it's not just about, here's this concept, here's this model. It's about, here's an opportunity to practice using it. Here's what it looks like. Here's what we're aiming for. So I think trying to really put a lens of behaviors and actions over everything we do in design around that can help get over that challenge, concern.
Yeah. And that conversation reminds me of a conversation I've had with at least one L&D person, where I really felt their desire to participate in the learner's learning, and not just, go do some digital. And when there is, so the L&D person can really curate the learning, like the advertising, here, the marketing of it, here, go do these, do this, do that, this and this bit, and then create something in between and really do those live parts and be really engaged and somewhat hands-on in the learning. Not all learning and development people want to be that, or have the capacity to be that hands-on, but some do. And just because learning is going digital doesn't mean that that's gone. Learning and development L&D people can still have, make a big mark on the learning of the employees and participants. I just wanted to add that in, because I
Definitely.
think, it doesn't mean the L&D job is gone, not at all. because I think there's a holding of learning, who's learning what and how can I help and how can we embed this and shift from the learning aspect to the doing and set up practices and even special interest groups or practice groups. There's a lot still to do to really make the learning stick from the organization side.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I work with a lot of clients, a lot of different L&D teams that are all set up differently. And I think that the ones where the learning is the most successful is where the L&D team are still involved in how this learning gets out there to people and everything that goes around it to support it. Because I think a huge part of L&D's role is creating a culture of learning in the organization. Yes. And when that's there, digital can really thrive.
Yeah, because it's part of the whole plan as opposed to over there. Yeah. So, Georgie, we have a couple of slides to share with people, and I'm just going to bring those up.
Yes.
Including your information, which will be here in case anybody wants to contact you, because you do amazing design work. So here's, sure. I'm just going to share for a moment the Rewired to Relate program, just to say a couple more words about it. Georgie, you gave a demonstration of that, so people might have a feel for it. But this program is a 6-week program. We call it brain training for working well with others. And it is about learning, as I said earlier, what's going on in the brain. Understand your brain, work better together, use your emotional brain so you can have the impact you want. In other words, the essence of emotional intelligence. And learn to manage stress and understand why well-being techniques are really important to help people do their best work. Not just as a nice to have, but it's really an essential to make sure that people have that are taking care of themselves, because it's part of helping them work better. Not just work better together, yes, but also work better at their jobs individually. Here's the different aspects of the program, the online content. This is basically what we've been talking about. So you saw quizzes, videos, supplementary longer reads and articles and short written bits. The supplementary bits are not necessarily required. So it's the short bit of reading that people learn the essence of the work from. Then there's exercises. There's the learning group we've been talking about where people deepen the learning. And then there's this structure to work with the accountability bit that people need. That's Rewired to Relate. And here's learning. Here's Lima Delta. Georgie, you want to say a couple words about yourself and your partner, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you need some digital learning content designed specifically for you and your business, then that is what we do at Lima Delta. So we are all about design, making sure it's designed in a really human way, as I was saying earlier, in a way that's going to really engage people fully, meaning that their performance improves afterwards. So we go through that design phase, and we also do the development of the e-learning as well, giving you the finished product. And we can do anything from kind of traditional digital learning, but also all of the other examples I gave earlier. So things like videos, podcasts, simulations, articles, all that good stuff. So that's what we're about, and you can find out more on our website here.
Super. Thanks, Georgie. And I just want to say to everyone, Lima Delta is great fun to work with. You guys are so amazing at your designs that you offered, and the learning hooks, and you have a real depth of understanding about what goes into learning, and I really appreciated that in our work together.
Thanks so much, Laurie. It was absolute pleasure working with you, and I'm biased because I designed some of Rewired to Lead, but it's an exceptional program, and I think anybody that signs up to that will learn so much about themselves and how to work well with their colleagues, and improve, I guess, make it a great place to work.
Thanks. And we are currently working on a small a mini course on the neuroscience of learning, so that will be coming out too. We'll let people know about that when that's out.
Yes,
month or two, something like that.
Yes, keep your eyes peeled for that. Looking forward to getting that out there.
Thank you everyone for attending. If you have any final comments for us, please leave them in the chat box, but it's about the top of the hour, so it's time for us to close. We hope to see you on our next webinar And we don't know what that is or even when that is exactly. It's still to be designed. I think we're taking a spring break in April, and we'll be back in May to talk about DEI. Where are we now? 3 years on from George Floyd's murder and all of that work that happened after that. Has it disappeared? Has it embedded? So I'm working on putting a webinar together on that topic.
Wow.
Hot topic, yeah.
Sounds fascinating. I will look forward to tuning in.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. And are we off of YouTube?
I was just making sure that we ended the stream.